Very often we see something very strange. A bug in the architecture is the most expensive mistake that can be made. Your developers will write complicated solutions, lots of smart words, lots of smart terms, but you won't know what to do with it. So what's the point? Consulting. Let me say a few words about consulting. In the process of selling our consulting services, the sales department sometimes shows us tenders, and we often see something very, very strange. In the same tender, we can see requirements to how to deploy the code, to the infrastructure and settings of some specific services, and some very, very technical details, as well as to other things of higher organizational order, such as the layout of the services, the interaction between the services, and the organizational structure of the business. I urge you not to confuse one with the other, because if you hand over the job to a tech consultant, well, obviously, you will get, as a result, very technical consulting requirements. There will be written a lot of smart words and a lot of smart terms, but from a management perspective, you will not know what to do with it.
There's a margin for error, but I'm pretty sure there's a 747 leaving Heathrow tomorrow at 6:30 in the evening for Baltimore. Apparently it's going to save the world. Not sure how that could be true, but give me a moment. I've only been in the case for 8 seconds.
The same applies to audits. What mistakes are expensive? Imagine that you have a service that was poorly developed. It was just written incorrectly. Well, if only that one particular service was poorly developed, then the price of the mistake will only be to rewrite that given service. If it is compact, then in theory, the price won't be very high because you have a small service, because you have correctly divided services, and you do not have large monolith. If you're very good at monolith development and you're having a technical audit, you will still have a big monolith to go through. And in any case, the speed of change will be much slower than if you would have had a large number of correctly arranged services, even though that they would be built from shit and sticks or would have been no-code solutions. So I urge you, please correctly set your priorities. This doesn't mean in any case that you do not have to deal with how exactly the development is done in-house. It's just different levels of order. There's a building project, and there's the glue used on the tiles in the kitchen. Do you see what I mean? These are different types of problems. A flaw in the architecture will cost you so much that you will no longer be interested in what kind of glue will be used in the kitchen. Do you understand what I mean? And the mistake in the architecture is the most expensive one. We usually have to pay an extremely high price for such errors. A lot of the previous work has to be rethought and redone all over again. All the concerned parties will need to get involved in the project again to simply understand its correctness and to understand how it now needs to be properly decomposed. And it also encourages developers to write poor code because it becomes complex, and where there is complexity, there are errors. If you have very poorly built services, they interact with each other in a very implicit way, not in a simple, not in the same, not in a unified way. Well, unification doesn't mean that every service sends the same thing. It means that the same principles are not being followed. In this case, your developers will write complex solutions. They'll always be slow. What's the point of having them, even if they're written very well? So set your priorities correctly, and please do not confuse organizational and architectural issues, which are related by DDD, and the in-house layout and implementation features. Because in the first case, you will pay an extremely high price if you make a mistake. And in the second case, you may not have to pay such a high price if you have everything organized and in order. The same goes for the audits of some systems, for example, Magento. We've had a lot of experience with audits, such as PIMCore audits. We do a lot of work using PIMCore, and we even sometimes do studies on PIMCore and so on. In some cases, we can be against its use, but if we're not the ones doing the audit, there's usually a huge protocol of comments concerning the code, saying that something could be done in one way and something else could be done in another way, that this could be done better, and so on. But when this document goes to the manager, to the product owner, what happens then? He will usually ask, listen guys, is this bothering us? Well, it's important to understand that if we take as an example such a giant company as Tesla or some super efficient organization such as Google, then perhaps they won't be very interested in saving money on putting things in order. However, if we take a look at a real organization with a real backlog, with huge problems, and with a limited time, then usually the product owner does nothing with this information, because this information becomes very little applicable, and that's when we get a strange paradox. Companies order an audit, and as a result they get a lot of technical and even maybe reasonable recommendations, which they will never use and which will never go into work. This happens very often. Therefore, pre-project research and technical consulting should be done primarily with a focus on the areas of responsibility of the services. Architectural errors will be very expensive, but mistakes made inside the service itself, considering that the services are compact and that they are simple, will not cost so much. That's it. Goodbye.